My friends, what lays before you is the myriad knowledge of an unfathomable universe. Join our intrepid remembrancers as they explore the heresy as history. From deep within the farthest reaches of the great library of Tiska, we are the Heresy Grad School. So said the War Master in his wisdom. Go forth, my sons, and illuminate them.
I love the color depiction on 145 of the pre-Prospero.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Versus what looks like dudes in gas masks with las guns.
Yeah, it's like old militia. But guys, Dave, did you read that little box out on 146 about the Dreamless Brotherhood?
No, I mean, I did. Yes, I have read it. I didn't... Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty badass.
Did not know that by the time the Thousand Sons hit Prospero, there were more of them, like, in stasis than there were actually active. That's crazy.
It really is. It really is. I mean, it's almost like they were a legion that... again, like, this is foreshadowing, right? Like, you know, it's almost like they're a legion that was destined to become this, you know, Rubrikai, automaton, you know, very powerful, but very few.
Yeah, because the automata, or not the automata, what are they called? The Rubrikai.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be, like, trapped and sort of dreamless, right?
Well, I've been listening to the Talons of Horus.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so good, dude.
So amazing.
It's almost like they aren't there, though. Like,
but they get, like, weird little flashes of insight.
They do, yeah. That's the way Kion describes it. He's like, I guess one of his brothers is, like, a little bit more aware than the other one, right? Like, he's, like, always, like, he's, like, Kion, right? Like, so that's all I can say, man. But yeah.
I mean, maybe after a while, with the rubric, like, legitimately the only piece that's left of them is the part that, like, can understand an order.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting, in the sequel, you know, his former master, Ashur Kai?
I haven't read the sequel yet, but yeah.
But, it's pretty good. Like, yeah. I'm not positive if I like this one or the sequel better, but it talks about how Ashur Kai actually keeps his Rubrikai painted in the old red of Prospero.
Oh, wow.
And that, like, his might actually retain a tiny bit more, like, awareness than other Rubrikai. It's pretty cool.
That is cool. Yeah, I'm really getting into it, and I really hope that we can... I hope we get, like, a post-scouring, Forge World treatment. I think that would be so...
that'd be amazing.
It really would be, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, ideally, you know, they'll do Into Siege of Terra, and then hopefully they'll be, like, Scouring and Legion Wars, and, you know...
Yeah, there is so much material in there for, like, the Legion Wars.
Yeah.
I mean, they could go for probably, maybe not quite as long as the Heresy, but pretty close.
Yeah. I mean, you got Clones of Horus, you got, you know, all sorts of interesting stuff. And just, like, everything's going on in the, like, eye. And so, like, even just battleground rules would be awesome. Because you know there's wonky shit happening on all of the worlds that are stuck in the eye.
Yeah.
And the Maelstrom.
Yeah, too.
Cool. Well, the only thing I was going to try to read tonight, if we have time, was the part I didn't get to last week, which was the leveling of 72-9, which is on page 157, because it is a, you know, it's a story about, I think, our favorite brother and a night house that nobody's ever heard of before, because
yes,
it's so good.
We will make time.
All right, cool, man.
I mean, do we want to start off with that, or do we want to start off with
well, Jason's got a hard stop. Let's get Jason
Yeah.
through his part too, and then we'll we can do the thing.
Yeah, sounds good to
Alright.
me.
Pat, you want to lead us in?
Yeah. So, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Heresy Grad School, part of the Remembrancers Retreat. Wow, I just jumbled that up. But yeah, we're back into our Thousand Suns coverage with Professors Dave, Jason, and myself, Patrick. We're gonna start with Jason, but I just wanted to do a little housekeeping and say thank you everybody for bearing with us as we've switched to like a new recording software. I definitely think it sounds fantastic, and I think, at least judging by your guys' comments and everything like that, it sounded pretty good. And I think everybody's enjoyed the intro, so I feel
Yeah.
vindicated.
I'm a big fan so far.
I mean, I think the first time I heard the intro, I had chills. So
It's pretty cool.
It was a good call.
yeah. I'll say this at the end as well, but if you're interested, we just launched our Patreon. It's once this episode goes out, it'll probably be a week old. You don't have to be a patron. You don't have to donate. If if you feel like it, do it. Otherwise, just enjoy the coverage. But yeah, that's it for me, Jason.
Alright,
Straight to you,
guys.
man.
Tonight, if you guys will remember, the Thousand Suns, where we left them, were not doing so hot. They were not having a good time of it. They got to get a little psychic exercise on this new planet called Bizant they were taking over, fighting a psychically gifted population, wherein 1 in 10 of the populace were psychically gifted. And it's not going so hot because one of them exploded into a bunch of crazy warp nonsense, and nobody had ever seen it before, and gotta imagine that's pretty terrifying. So tonight we're going to talk about what was going on as the Legion tries to recover from this, and it just gets so much worse. Just so bad, you guys. Now, one really big issue the Thousand Suns have always had is they are always a little more insular than a lot of the other legions. They kind of have a sort of ideal of they're the only ones that can understand this, so they only tend to associate with themselves. At best, this makes them seem kind of aloof and arrogant to some of the other legions. At worst, it makes them seem suspicious and conniving, which kind of fuels a lot of the issues they go into that we'll be talking about tonight. So let's check in with these guys. Outwardly, the Legion maybe doesn't even seem all that different after Bizant. It's not great inside the Legion, but outside the Legion, they try to put on the bravest face they possibly can. Inside the Legion, there's kind of this feeling, this maybe wishful thinking, that what happened on Bizant with Daleth was kind of this unique and terrible thing that just happened once, from all this crazy psychic energy flying around, and it never happened again. However, we all know that's not how storytelling happens in the 31st millennium. So, the Great Crusade is rolling on, and the 15th Legion is trying to do the best it can. It's still conquering planets as they go, even as they start to lose legionnaires. And they're losing legionnaires to the flesh change as they continue. And what's pretty interesting is the flesh change is now manifesting again and again. And they've named it this. They've given it like this base literal name that's so far removed from everything else the Thousand Suns do. Like Tizca's called the City of Light and the Bastion of Reason. That's like this ostentatious but kind of technically correct, way they have of naming things, where this is just the flesh change. Flat, basic, literal, completely unlike them, but time and time again in lore and novels surrounding the Thousand Suns, they say that there is power in a name. And the name they've given the flesh change is kind of... it seems almost that they're trying to make it something other. It's so far removed from the norm that it's a different... almost removed from the Legion itself. So, they're still kind of fighting to control this and trying to figure it out, on top of trying to keep it a secret from everybody else. Because unknown to them, but known to us at the time, the Blood Angels and the Rout are also kind of trying to deal with this. Not the flesh change, obviously, but they're kind of dealing with their own, interlegion problems that are kind of dicey. Like, at this point, two legions have already been maybe annihilated, maybe wiped out by the Emperor. We don't expressly know, but it's been mentioned in the book series
Inside
many
job.
times. Maybe a bit of an inside job.
But Jason, that's I think important though because, and the Emperor's children, the Third Legion suffered almost to the point of extinction early on from.
They're right. That's true.
Gene seed regression, and so I think while they are certainly exhibiting signs that are suspicious, I think to the rest of the Imperium it would look like maybe they were having some type of gene seed degradation. That certainly I don't think it was obvious that it was linked to the warp outside of the Legion and the Brotherhood, and they certainly kept it that way. But I think that may have also helped to protect them, and then it also may have helped to the fact that other legions were struggling with it too. That they had their own sort of dark secrets, and I think the legions in general just kind of they wanted to stay away from each other, right? They had their own expeditions and their expeditionary feats, and so. All of that in context, I think, gives the Thousand Sons a little bit of breathing room, but not a lot. And their detractors will certainly grow as we go down, the road on this.
Personally, I would call it professional jealousy, but I am a little bit biased. So, again, something here starting out. The Thousand Sons don't even really know what's going on. The flesh change, like we know, is linked to their psychic abilities, but this is just something they're starting to figure out. And what I thought was pretty interesting is they mention here that while it does affect legionaries during times of high psychic manifestation, it doesn't necessarily afflict the most powerful or those who use it the most often or the most sparingly. It's afflicting legionnaires with even little or no psychic inclination whatsoever, as well as the most powerful. And this is obviously causing a huge problem inside the Legion, but even outside the Legions, it's starting to cause problems for allied forces and support elements, which are now starting to suffer inexplicable losses and quote-unquote accidents, which can kind of be seen as, the Thousand Sons are even going so far as to neutralize allied forces to keep this a secret. And this is definitely not garnering them any sympathy from any of the other legions, because again, at best, they're already seen as kind of aloof and arrogant. And it's kind of a common belief through some of the others in the hierarchy of the Imperium that this was, like Dave mentioned, either a genetic flaw, something wrong with their gene seed, maybe like what happened with the Thunder Warriors, even though that was kind of pre-engineered, or it's starting to garner whispers of some sort of moral or philosophical corruption, which isn't terrific, either way you look at it. So the Thousand Sons of the Legion are kind of struggling now. Their numbers are definitely dwindling. Between normal battlefield attrition, you've got this flesh change really cutting into their numbers, and it's going from massive formations of troops that should be thousands strong down to hundreds, in some cases even down to dozens of individual legionaries, and they're almost like ghost ships in the legions that are just crewed by several handfuls of legionaries that formerly held hundreds and hundreds of Astartes. And what's really interesting here, I'd like to call out this little box out here on page 146, which I think is pretty fascinating. It's called the Dreamless Brotherhood. And what's just totally blew my mind the first time I read it is it speaks on how the Thousand Sons first tried to attempt to cure the flesh change. They tried things like meditation, willpower, some even trying to use crazy alchemical or scientific like retrovirals, different agents like that, attacking it almost from like a scientific biological perspective, as if it were a disease. And pretty much all of these attempts failed, so the Thousand Sons didn't know what to do. They didn't want to just murder their brothers, so they took to the practice of putting them in stasis. And this ranges from, volunteers, entering stasis when they feel the very first signs of the flesh change coming on, to ones that are like very far gone into it and they're stuffed in there under duress. And what totally blew my mind is it mentions specifically as they're reaching Prospero, among all the fleets the Thousand Sons have, in their holds there are more Thousand Sons in stasis to prevent the flesh change than there are actual active Astartes in the Legion. And the scale of Legionnaires, just that huge chunk taken out of the Legion by the flesh change, was pretty crazy to me.
Hey, Jason, you know what else that makes me think of? Having been listening to The Talons of Horus by Aaron Dembski Bowden, which, for those of you who have not listened to it, is amazing and a must. And
just go do it now. Like, put us on pause. Go listen to Aaron Dembski Bowden for like 12 hours or whatever. Hands down, amazing.
Absolutely, and
100%.
and unlike the name would imply, it is absolutely a story about the Thousand Sons, as much as it is about sort of the origins of the Black Legion. It's just so much good lore in it. But Jason, what it makes me think of is, and we'll get there in the Black Books as well. We'll get to Prospero, but none of the Thousand Sons fleet was present at Prospero. So they leave. Magnus orders them away before the censure host can sort of descend on Prospero. Everything that happens, right? The burning of Prospero. But what it makes me think of is the Thousand Sons have all of these fucking ships, right? They've got a Legion fleet, but they've got like a handful of dudes, right, left that aren't in stasis because of the flesh change, and so I think it makes sense when you get to the Talon of Horus and then the Black Legion. You start to look at what the Thousand Sons are post Prospero, and it's one, maybe two legionnaires, basically, piloting cruisers and capital ships, right? Just directing them, and they just have this. I think they're the most interesting legion because they are just so awesomely powerful on an individual level, right? They have just so much. They have so much capability. They're so much more than just warriors. They're just they're gifted in terms of lore and esoteric knowledge. They know how to pilot capital ships through the warp, and they're just so cool. But yeah, I think the Dreamless Brotherhood, just to get back to that, I think is great foreshadowing for what the Legion becomes. Right, we talked about this. The Rubricae, having 90% of your Legion basically trapped in this deathless state as virtually automata, right? There's some level of, I don't know, awareness within them, but this is the curse of the Legion from the very beginnings, right? From Byzant on, which Byzant happens relatively quickly in the Great Crusade, within a couple of decades, and so this is the curse of the Legion, that they are essentially cursed to carry around their trapped brothers And they still talked about him like that, right? So you know the Thousand Sons that are still active, that are still aware in the post Siege of Terra, the Scouring. They still talk about them like they're brothers, and I just think that's a really interesting sort of foreshadow there. But yeah, get back to it, man.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Really rarely do we ever see the Thousand Sons after, heck, even before Prospero. Almost every novel outside of literally A Thousand Sons by Graham McNeil, um, we almost never see them as anything other than like ones or twos in like, advisory positions like by themselves. We almost never see them in like Legion strength doing things, with entire formations. So yeah, I definitely think that's a good point. Even in the beginning here, it really they really kind of set themselves apart as to how they normally operate, I think. But anywho, let's jump back on into this black book here. So the Dreamless Brotherhood, kind of a not a terrific outlook for the Thousand Sons. And what's kind of interesting, something Dave just kind of touched on here, is even as the Thousand Sons are having this like massive rate of attrition between, just the same losses any other legion would suffer while on crusade, but also they're dealing with this flesh change taking more and more and more of their active warriors. Uh, the Thousand Sons that do survive are becoming more and more powerful. They've far outstripped any of the other, psychers in some of the other legions, and they're basically into entirely new territory. Like psychers this powerful have never really been known outside of, potentially the Emperor and Malcador. And the Thousand Sons that have survived are essentially forced to become so because the flesh change is taking them out slowly and surely. Sometimes, though, even hundreds of thousand suns at a time are succumbing to this. But the flesh change is taking them out. They're growing more and more insular. They are receiving less and less support from, allied legions, allied support elements. Nobody wants to work with them anymore. So it says they call out from a certain point of view, it's almost as if they had little choice but to become more and more powerful, since they have all of these other things that other legions normally have, support, resupply, allied, imperial uh, auxilia and militia elements, things like that, denied to them, that they're really using the weapons that they have and trying to make the best of it. Now, from another, view atop the moral high ground, it could also be said that they are kind of using their powers not because they're necessary, but because they feel morally justified and right in doing so. Not my viewpoint, but it could be argued. Now, following on here, um, like we talked about, the ships of the Thousand Suns are essentially becoming ghost ships. You have these massive formations that were formerly thousands strong. They're down to hundreds, which are down to scores, which are down to dozens, down to handfuls of legionnaires. And it's getting to the point that elements outside of the Thousand Suns, even a few Primarchs who will remain nameless, because of course they'd never say it to, a Thousand Suns' face, but they're calling for actually disbanding the 15th Legion. Uh, in some points, they're thinking of it kind of as a kindness, like a mercy given out, because the Legion, even to outward eyes now, kind of seems to be dying off, and they feel like a disbanding would be more honorable than just kind of, falling over and dying because they can't sustain themselves anymore. Of course, the other end of that spectrum, now some other elements are calling for them to be annihilated, to be cut out like a cancer from the rest of the legions. And what's interesting is the Emperor definitely heard these calls to like end the Thousand Suns, but he never is forced to act on it. And it's not really evident what the Emperor would have done because his hand is never forced into action. Because before the Thousand Sons can absolutely slip off the end, they find Prospero. And Prospero is definitely something that rejuvenates the Thousand Sons and more or less saves the Legion as a Legion itself. Now, Prospero is pretty interesting as a planet. Even before Magnus, even before the Emperor, Prospero is essentially a second Terra. It is like the 1 in a billion chance of a habitable perfect planet that just manages to get everything right. It's even to the point that it was referred to as a new Terra, which is pretty impressive, considering. But at some point during Old Night, like almost every other planet in the known 30K universe, turds really hit the fan, and very, very bad things go down. Now, the exact outcome of what happened on Old Night was never recorded. There does seem like there was a huge upswing in humans with psychic potential on Prospero, and there's probably a lot of psychic storms and witchery going on, just like what happened on dozens and dozens of other worlds during the Age of Strife, and seldom ended well for anybody involved. But perhaps even a bigger deal is what this caused. Now, very similar to the Soul Terra out here on Prospero, huge upswing in psychic potential. But unlike Terra, this caused a really big issue. If you guys want to check out page 147 under the Mind Parasites. So if you've ever listened to Thousand Sons by Grad McNeil, you are well versed in the Psych Nuine. So these guys are essentially giant scarab beetles that live 50-50 between the real world and the warp. They're all very rudimentarily psychic, and they use a very rudimentary form of telepathy to psychically project their eggs into the mind of a living psyker. It's actually required for their reproductive cycle.
Ugh.
Right? It's super gross to think about. It's like, what if a facehugger from Aliens, possibly the best sci-fi franchise ever created, instead of, like, using its weird, like, stomach tube to shove eggs into you, it, like, psychically projected them. It's like you couldn't even dodge it if you were on your toes, because it's psychic. That's creepier to me somehow.
Yeah, that is pretty freaking creepy.
Right? It's not pleasant for anybody involved. But with all of this psychic potential blossoming in the people of Prospero, the Psych Nuine has essentially found the perfect nest. And of course, exact specifics aren't recorded because it was just a hellacious turd storm of planet-wide proportions. But it's a possibility Prospero was almost wiped out within a single night. These Psych Nuine, drawn to this psychic upswing, really destroyed 99% of the planet. The only survivors left banded together to form the only city actually left on Prospero, which is Tizca, City of Light, Citadel of Reason, the last and only true city of Prospero. And Tizca is an incredibly big deal for the people on Prospero. It's a bastion that is both a huge center of learning, of architecture, of health and medicine, of all sorts of higher education and learning, also for psychic potential, but it's also maintained as a bastion against the Psych Nuine. It's more or less the only safe place left on the planet. Everything else is kind of inhospitable to human life, even if it weren't constantly, patrolled by roving bands of psychic mind-eating scarabs. Because, again, touching back on Thousand Sons, the novel, the residents of Tizca actually have a massive kind dome that protects them from more or less everything the world can throw at them. And as the Thousand Suns meet them and kind of disperse into the populace of Prospero, they really start to bond and improve things back and forth. But it's not great for anybody involved what happened with the upswing in psychic potential. But what is really important here in Tizca, besides providing a bastion, every single person born in Tizca, be they nobility, be they just an everyday, average dude, almost every single one of them possesses at least a spark of psychic potential, which we talked last time on Bazat. 1 in 10 of the populace is psychically gifted. In Tizca, it's almost every single person born, which is crazy. And probably a huge part of why the Thousand Sons move in and set up shop. And speaking of moving in and setting up shop and improving everything for everybody and nothing bad happening ever, I'm going to turn it over to Dave to tell you about a pretty amazing battle the Thousand Sons get down to on a night world.
Cool. Yeah, hey, thanks for that, Jason. That's, I think, that's the early lore of the Thousand Sons that we have, I think, in the Black Book, right? Because right after the sort of the mind parasite, the coming of Magnus, and that changes things, right? Yeah. So I think my favorite part of this book, actually, of Book 7, Inferno, is probably the exemplary battles that start on page 156, because it really is the cool lore of early thousands, most of which it's an odd place to put it, but the Aceradine defense happens very early, and then the story that I'm going to read you guys is called The Leveling of 72-9, which features one of our favorite characters, I think, certainly one of the most interesting and important characters of the larger lore, right? Captain Ormst, Ahriman's brother, is featured in this little vignette here. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and read it. But it is interesting because 72-9, although it's not stated this way in the lore, if we were to use the sort of the Great Crusade convention, naming conventions, right, this would be the 9th planet discovered by the 72nd expedition. But that's just a little conjecture on my part. I'm not sure that's what it is. Page 157, The Leveling. 72-9 is now just one amongst many small, sparsely populated worlds eking out an existence on the margins of the Imperium. Its name has remained unchanged since its conquest, and is a mark of its lowly place in the order of... This unremarkable face is, however, a mask painted by the Imperium over the planet's past, in the hope that, even in obscurity, its people might hope for a better future, because before 72-9, there was another world. Volnum was a night world, one of the rare few which had endured since the dark age of technology, weathering the trials of old night to be reunited with the rest of humanity during the Great Crusade. Clad in towering knight armors, the nobles of these scattered realms had stood as protectors over their people. But while other night worlds had become the seats of noble houses whose traditions of warrior honor protected them from invaders, on Volnum, the long ages of darkness had bred shadows and bitterness in those who called it home. The ruling line of Volnum, House Kratax, had become rotten, its noble blood tainted by insanity and cruelty. Their holds were dark places, piled atop bones and sealed chambers that echoes to the screams of the forgotten. The first emissaries of the Imperium sent to negotiate compliance were all executed by being strapped to the gun muzzles of Kratax knights, all save one, who was flayed and their skin scrapped for parchment on which the head of House Kratax wrote his rejection of such defiance could not stand, and against the power of a knight household, even the Legiones Astartes could be pressed, but not the 1,000 Sons. 60 warriors came to the plains before the fortress of Kratax under the command of Captain Orm. At first, Kratax must have considered it a joke, or perhaps another attempt to make terms, for they sent only one of their household out to meet with the waiting warriors. The knight fired as soon as it was in range, sweeping its thermal lance across them in a line of screaming, glowing air. None of the warriors fell. The touch of the knight's fury had seemed to drain away into them, or dissipated into nothing. In reply, lightning leapt from amongst the warriors, crawling over the knight of Kratax, burrowing into its armor plates, melting power connections, and whipping through its metal bones. It fell, but before it could hit the ground, an invisible force ripped its head from its body and cast it back before the gates of Kratax's hold. The knights came from the gates then, every single war machine of the blighted household. The ground around the circle of 1,000 suns churned with explosions and melted, fused, and cracked as the charging knights poured their fury before them. The telekinetic shields protecting the 1,000 suns shook, and within their circle some fell to their knees, blood oozing from the joints of their armor to freeze and boil in the warp-charged air. But still they waited as the knight's charge shook the ground beneath their feet. When the lead knight was a shadow above them, Ormst raised his hand and closed his fingers. The knight stopped, staggered, and then fell. Its pilot's flesh turned to vapor inside its cockpit. Before the metal giant had hit the ground, the 1,000 suns had dropped their shields, lifted the body of the dead knight into the air, and cast it at one of its cousins. From that moment, the battle is said to have lasted no more than 500 seconds. And at its end, the molten and twisted remains of every single knight lay on the witch-frosted ground. The 1,000 Suns Legion lost 3 warriors, 2 killed by brain hemorrhage while using their powers, and 1 crushed by the dead metal of a knight. Those who had survived departed before the exploratory units of the Mechanicum arrived to strip Kratax's hold. When word of the victory reached the Imperium's distant war council, it was greeted only with the sound of silence. So that is the leveling of 72-9. And yeah, what do you guys think?
Don't fuck with the 1,000 Suns.
I think it's spectacular. The only 1,000 Sun killed by a knight was accidental because a dead one fell on him.
Yeah. I mean, dude, 60 legionnaires to take out a knight household. I mean, that's amazing. And I love the fact that they're gone before the Mechanicum exploratory units can even get there, right? They're like, we're not going to stick around to explain this. But
the 1,000 Suns caused 100% more casualties to themselves than the Night House did.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love that story for just so many reasons, man. I love it because it's a story of a knight household that I had never heard of, right? It's very, I think, Pat, it's very reminiscent of your knight household.
Yeah,
right?
It's kind of like Earthane, where, like, no one knew it really existed until, like, they decided to mess up some Imperial convoys, and, well, Horus was right there, so...
Yeah, I also like the fact that it gives, I think, some, the night households, the night world, it gives them some depth, right? It's like not all of them are these, very sort of like chivalric, pastoral, plains where, the knights stand sentinel and the people worship them as gods, right? It's like, no, man, there's some dark shit that goes down.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me, that makes sense in like a 40K narrative, but in a 30K narrative, these are worlds coming right off of, Old Night.
Yeah.
And like the awful things that happened. So of course they're going to be a little messed up. Granted, there are night houses that, weathered the storm, they were good to go, the Imperium came and they're like, yeah, sure. But yeah, then you have those night houses like Earthane or this one even, where like something catastrophic happened, and they've turned to like this animalistic
Yeah.
evilness, you know?
I don't know. I think if if I were looking, into the crystal ball, pretty sure that Captain Ormst would have gone into House Kratax's vaults and scoured their libraries, gathered their secrets, and they were well away before the Mechanicum ever got there. See what they so.
Well, Thousand Sons are all bookworms.
Well, no, but I think there's, why were the Thousand Sons sent to deal with a night household that was, well, because they could, right? They had the
Right.
capability to do that. But why'd the Thousand Sons say yes? Because there probably was lore there from Old Night, the Age of Strife, the Dark Age of Technology that they could go in and get, right? Because the Thousand Sons it's never a simple compliance, right? It's never a simple conquest. It's always
There's got to be a reason for it.
yeah, and you get that in Jason. What is it? Is it the Burning of Prospero or is it No Fear? I can't remember. Actually, talks about the Thousand Sons. I know they both do.
Burning of Prospero.
Yeah, the Burning of Prospero, right? Which is not actually the Burning of Prospero, right? Isn't that's the joke, right? Is that the Burning of Prospero doesn't actually happen in the Burning of Prospero.
It's like 10 pages. Yeah.
But still, like, it's the name, like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you look at the cover and you read the book and you're like, this is not the book that I thought I was going to get. But you do get, I think, a lot of that early lore, man. It's what's the world that the Space Wolves are on with the Thousand Sons, where the Thousand Sons are like, yeah, we're not gonna, burn these guys out because they've got like good lore that we want, and the Space Wolves are, it's Maleficarum, right? We're burn him down. Yeah, they're like, no.
Pretty sure that's Shrike, but don't
Yes.
quote me on it.
No, you're right.
Because that's the one where, like, Lorgar steps in and is like, hey guys, let's not murder each other, right?
And then they proceed to murder each other.
Yeah, weirdly, the word bearers are there, and then Lorgar is the voice of reason. The whole thing
But-
is very.
Okay, going back to First Heretic, you say weirdly the word bearers are there, but like
They're fucking
throughout-
everywhere.
yeah, throughout the Crusade, they are everywhere, and it's like planned that they're everywhere. So
Yeah. Whether openly or clandestine, they're a
they're
big
like
legion.
they may as well be part of Alpha Legion, whatever.
Well, what do you guys think?
I mean, I think that piece alone makes me want to buy the the full copy of it, the physical copy.
Of
Just
Book
because-
7?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The exemplary battles are so good. And maybe we'll go back and maybe we'll do a couple more next episode because they really, really are very. But yeah, Pat, have you gotten any other nuggets for us? Have you got anything you wanna talk about?
No. I think that's it for me. I'm just the guy that listens to you guys and adds little tidbits of non sequiturs. So, but I guess we'll go right into plugs. Dave, you got anything?
I don't think so. Other than Patreon, whatever. So I know that Jesse has put some stuff up there, and I've been talking to him. I think he wants to sort of, gauge the sort of the appetite and sort of take the temperature of the response, right? Like what people are interested in. And so I know in the past we've talked about doing some tiers. Right? That's what they're called, I think, right? Tiers.
Yeah.
And so I talked to Jesse about that, and he said, let's wait a little bit and see how this whole thing sort of, not unravels, but sort of unfolds, right? But if you guys, our listeners, are interested in something being there, if there's something that you would like to see, in exchange for obviously you helping us put this whole thing together, and sponsor it, shoot us a message and hit us up, and we will do our best to sort of make that happen. But anyway, that's where it is, and I just wanted to say that because I know we've talked about it in the past, Pat, and that some people might be looking for certain tiers, and they're not there right now, and that's why.
Yeah, I would definitely say, like, if there's something that you'd be interested in, listeners, do message the Facebook. Both Jesse and I are always looking at the messages, and we'll usually respond within an hour. But I definitely think we want to gauge how people feel about it. And please, listeners, do not feel like you have to do our Patreon. We love you regardless. We enjoy just talking about the heresy. We enjoy, in this case with the grad school, we love talking about the lore. We're going to be doing this regardless. But
yeah, we would do this anyway. I think it's more like this is an ability for us to sort of maybe do more. Pat, you talked about like an actual heresy grad school textbook.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that. Or just a
syllabus, like just a syllabus. So I'm putting together some notes. I'd like to do that. I'd like to have sort of the catalog of back episodes with suggestions for further reading available, and sort of maybe some notes from Jason and Pat and I, and maybe some pictures of colored plates that we've really drawn a lot from. So those are projects that I think would be possible only through Patreon, right? We would not have really the bandwidth or the time to do that. And then also just the overall quality, right? Like the kind of stuff we've been adding is, all that stuff is.
Yeah, and just, housekeeping and bills, kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I'm super excited that we've launched it. I know we've already gotten a couple tier 3 patrons. Actually, my wife has is now one of our patrons, and
that's awesome.
Yeah, she signed up for it, and she's like, okay, so what am I doing? What should I do with this merch discount? I'm like, I don't know. Get yourself a shirt to work out in, or
buy merch.
Buy merch. Yeah, but I mean,
cool, man.
Yeah, all I will say is, both through listening and through Patreon, thank you all for supporting us.
Yeah.
Jason, you got anything?
Not a whole lot.
Okay.
You guys said it pretty well.
Yeah. Coke, we'd still like that that sponsorship. You can sign up for a Patreon as well.
Heck yeah, Coke, get in on our Patreon for $8.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Feed Jason's dirty addiction.
So where are we going with this, guys? Are we gonna go? Do you think we'll go through the whole Thousand Suns? I guess the lore in the Black Book, is it sort of the plan?
I mean, I certainly think so. I mean, we can always take a second and stop and have side options,
Yeah.
Do little non sequiturs.
Yeah. You're gonna just continue to make fun of me for that, Pat.
Yeah,
I see that.
I'm still gonna do it.
I see where this is going.
Yeah, but I mean, I think as of right now, I think we'll probably do like a
couple more episodes.
And then we'll see where we're at.
See where we're at. Cool. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening. Hope you all have enjoyed the episode, and have a good night. And fuck off, Craig.
Fuck off, Craig, wherever you are.
Yeah, we don't use you anymore. Ha! Take that. Oh.